Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures, and this is our third attempt. I'll let you guess about why the first two failed.
Well, look, honestly, it was 1 for 1, right? It was
100% equal.
One was Ben's fault, one was Jim's fault,
So this week we watched Total Recall, 1990s Total Recall.
Should we say 1990 edition? The 1990 edition?
No, because is it not the original other than the book it was based on?
Well, I guess. If you want to get technical, fine.
So I'll quickly run down the stats. Total Recall, released June 1, 1990, directed by Paul Verhoeven. I always have trouble with that last name.
It's not an easy one.
But the dude has made so many movies that I love. I'm a massive, and it's probably not a movie that'll come up here, so I'll say it. I'm a massive Starship Troopers fan.
I reckon it would have come up here.
It still can. So
it's niche. It's Starship Troopers.
It feels such a wonderful role in cinema.
It's the weirdest mixture of like mainstream and niche, and it's just, but that's sort of, I feel like Starship Troopers is Paul Verhoeven at the end of his Hollywood tenure. Yeah. Total Recall, he's smack bang in the middle. We've RoboCopped. We know who he is.
Yeah.
And now he's coming through with, what is probably his most recognized film in, like the West as, as director. Like I would say, would you say that?
RoboCop and this for sure.
Yeah.
Like written by or screenplay by Ronald Shue, Dan O'Bannon, and John Povell. I'm going to burn a fact right up. That is some shenanigans that those are the only three people listed on this screenplay. Because this had over 40 kind of versions of this screenplay written over the years before this was produced. Based on the book We Can Remember It for Wholesale by Philip K. Dick. Again, one of... I don't know how much of his you've read. I've read most of his short stories.
I think I've read the famous ones, which sounds like such a, I don't know.
But there's a lot of famous ones.
It's just a hipster thing to say, but like, I read the famous ones, like, but I love the cyberpunk genre. So I've read a lot of, I guess what became cyberpunk, when Philip K. Dick was writing it, I don't know if the term had really been coined yet, but, it's this kind of fiction, and he was really the father of it in so many ways. So,
but any of you who don't know, without Philip K. Dick, you don't have Blade Runner, you don't have Minority Report, you don't have this movie. Like there's his fingertips, along with like Arthur C. Clarke, his fingerprints in sci-fi are massive. Like
and Isaac Asimov as well, you should say. So, but like, but that said, I don't feel like Total Recall, Paul Verhoeven 1990 edition has that much Philip K. Dick left in it by the time they're finished.
It's a weird amount. So basically the first third of this movie is kind of that short story reworked. And it's a lot of the reason why there are so many drafts of this film, because nobody could nail the last third of this movie because it doesn't exist within the Philip K. Dick universe of sci-fi.
Well, look, I mean, I don't want to take us on a tangent too quickly, but do you think they nailed the last third of this movie? Like,
not at all. But I do enjoy the last third of this movie. Like nailing it and being an adequate ending are two different things. But hey, yes, before we detour, music starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rachel Tickton, Sharon Stone, Michael Ironside, Ronnie Cox, Michael Bell, what is it? Michael Bell, Michael Champion, and Mel Johnson Jr., who is the cab driver. Music by Jerry Goldsmith. Budget 48 to 80 million. I've realized it's hard to get budgets for movies before the 2000s.
Yeah,
it's always a range, right? And it's because
it's also sort of, it became, it's kind of going back that way again a little bit, like, because I think, for a while there in sort of the 2000s, really probably up to about, 2012, 2013, they wanted you to know how much they spent because it was a bit of a mark of, like how good the movies good the movie's going to be. But yeah, in sort of the old days, I just think it was more no one cared about it, and these days I feel like they're burying the lead a little bit with how much did we spend? We don't really want you to know. We want it to be a carefully curated number that we're
The one,
comfortable
the
with.
ones you hear about now are like, hey, iTunes spent this much on this series. Like
Yeah.
they're the ones kind of bragging now. And box office, 261.4 million. This was also at the kind of start of people making movies for longer than their theatrical run. So home video and all that
Mm.
sort of stuff. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
that market really being considered now as, something that was gonna.
international.
Exactly, yeah. So, but look, I I enjoyed rewatching this movie, I should
It's
say,
insane.
but I was kind of shocked at, and then I thought back, I'm like, it's Paul Verhoeven. Why was I
The
shocked? But
violence.
just the amount of violence, like, and also like the grossness of the violence. It's quite a gross movie. Like, I think there's no less than three exploding Arnold Schwarzenegger heads in this film. So, so I sort of was a little bit like, if you work out how gross or not the film is based on how many exploding Arnold Schwarzenegger heads, this one's got three of them. So
This movie liked exploding heads in general. Like that, most characters have an exploding head visual effect.
there's actually a
It's
lot of
wild.
prosthetic heads in this movie, like, really,
Well, it's
which
actually
are quite well done.
well, it's something actually this movie became really kind of known for, whereas its visual effects. It won an Academy Award. And I actually learnt something about the Academy Awards. Did you know they used to have a category of Academy Awards? You probably did. Called
Well, they've had a number of categories that have come and gone over the years, but what one are you thinking of?
this is called Academy Award for Special Achievement. It was a
Oh, okay.
category of award that existed for movies who had advanced something in cinema before the category for it really existed. So quite often this award would be given to a film, and then the next year the category would exist.
Right. Well, so I didn't know that this was on that list. What was the
It
what
was
was
the
the thing?
visual effects. So for
Really? Okay.
basically like visual effects, all that sort of stuff. So like they did like it was one of those last films that used large scale models a lot. It was so many prosthetics, so many complete like makeovers of human beings. Like this is what they call it, so I'm going to call it the fat lady prosthetic.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
is insane. Like this movie kind of pushed a lot of boundaries in cinema that had been pushed before, but probably not all within the same film. And that was hyperviolence. That was the really kind of hard sci-fi angle. And then it was the visual effects of the film. For those of you who don't understand, maybe if you're listening to this, you're a little younger, visual effects and special effects are different things. That it is a common confusion because in the day and age we live in, most of what we see is kind of like a mixture of the two or some sort of wizardry. Visual effects is usually the physical.
Well, actually, it's the opposite.
Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry. Visual effects are like the digital, special effects of the visual.
No. So
You've confused me now.
yeah, visual effects are typically CGI computers compositing.
Yes.
Special effects are more what we call a practical effect that takes place on the film set. Or was done in some way for real, quote unquote. So,
for example, in this film, the X-ray was a really early first example of computer-generated visual effects.
yes,
Yeah.
So, and this film is right on the sort of the edge of what became the digital revolution, So if we're sort of here in 1990, 93 is Jurassic Park. So, and that's really obviously the massive one where it just sort of pushes forward by leaps and bounds. But I was kind of sort of carrying on that theme of looking at, the special effects, if you like, with a few of the, some of the very early computer stuff, then also getting thrown in there. I was really impressed. I was both impressed and disappointed. And this is going to be such a weird thing, but I was both simultaneously all the time at the sets of this movie because this movie just had set after set after set that were just big build big builds on sound stages, so just massive constructed sets, but at the same time it all very much looked like it was a constructed set on a soundstage. And I felt like that was really prominent when they were in any cars driving around, or in any, I don't know, future buggy things driving around, because it was like, wow, we had this sort of like amazing, they built everything out, but at the same time, it was pretty clear that the street was only like 7 meters long, and then you
Yeah.
were hitting the edge of the soundstage.
So this
So
film was almost exclusively filmed on sets in Mexico. Uh, it had a pretty long filming period down there, and then all the desert stuff is kind of in what they Fire State National Park in like Nevada.
yeah, right.
So the red kind of Mars outlook is a life location, most of it, and horribly so. A lot of cast and crew suffered from dust inhalation while working on this film. Like proper, were not good from it
Yeah, right.
because it was just such a wild environment to work in. We've skirted one of the major things that this movie is touted for, and that is its story. This is a wild, kind of kinked story in that it just kind of it'll throw a right angle in and change directions at at any moment. So, Tim, can you explain the story to our audience?
And I think, look, this was something I really wanted to talk to you about regarding this film, because you watch it and look, it had been a while since I'd seen it. I have seen it a lot, like probably, I don't know what you call a lot, but in my adult life, I've probably seen it 4 or 5 times, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? But again, not really recently. And you look at it and it's sort of like, it's this story of, you've got Doug Quaid, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who he's sort of dissatisfied. He's got a wife, he's got a job, but he's not really happy in his life. So he goes along to this place called Recall, which is supposed to implant a memory of a life that's lived, and while that process is taking place, but they discover something in his brain, and realize sort of that something is wrong. And from then on, it's sort of like he's uncovered as kind of like a secret agent, with stuff installed in his brain, and he's got information, and it's something about Mars, and something about Mars, and then his wife's like, out to get him, like, and is in on it, and everyone's in on it, and it's sort of, he's on the run, and it's a fugitive story here in the middle of the movie. He finally gets to Mars, and then at that point, it's sort of like, okay, why am I here? Okay, well, you're here because
you know something.
you know something, and the thing that you know is that this bad guy called Cohagen on Mars controls all the air, and we have a way to get everybody air that's not controlled by Cohagen, and you can do that for us by turning on this alien technology that you stumbled across when you were actually, spoiler, not really a spy, but one of Cohagen's spies. So you were a double agent, right? Through this whole thing, which was all a ruse to get you to actually weed out the leader of the spies, this dude called Quarto. So, but all of that is revealed in the last third of the film. And that's kind of why I said to you at the start of the podcast, I'm like, and do you think they nailed the last third? Because it's so weird to like literally, and it does that thing which is kind of more like what you'd see in a modern movie that we'd pay out, where it's like, we meet a bunch of characters in one scene, and then in the very next scene, those same characters who we just met are imperiled, and we're supposed to care about their fates from there till the end of the movie. And that is, of course, all of the freedom fighters and rebels that he finds in the bar. You know what I mean? And it's sort of like
In the town area that he kind of
in the
goes, where all the
town area.
mutants are.
Exactly. So it's sort of like, so what's this movie about? Well, it's a spy story, and then it's, not a spy story, and it's a story about revolution, and then after it's a story about revolution, it's a story about double agents, and then it's kind of, and it does just sort of snowball from one thing to the next thing, and it doesn't, in a weird way it works, and then in a lot of other ways it sort of just doesn't hang together, and then when you look back on it, it's they kind of cheat, because when you look back at the end of the movie, there's sort of that idea of, yes, it is all wacky and over the top, so therefore was it just a dream at recall the whole time because
So
it
there's
wasn't
like
even real, like, and it's like, that's clever when you have a story so convoluted and so all over the place, because it doesn't really hold together particularly well, but you've also got a story mechanic which tells us maybe why, so.
so there are like four turns, and there are multiple turns, but there are four turns in this movie that I think are written specifically to go, hey, don't think about what just happened.
Mm,
The first is when he is at Total Recall, or Recall, and he's like, I want to go to Mars, and they kind of talk about a few details that he wants in his memory and all that sort of stuff. And that when they try to implant the memory, they're like, hey, I didn't even implant the memory. We discovered a memory block or another block, and we get the reveal of he was a secret agent, even though he doesn't remember being a secret agent. And you get his wife turning on him, which is Sharon Stone, who I think is actually pretty good in this movie as her kind of role, because it really could have been a fairly one-dimensional character, but there's a couple of moments where she kind of plays the kind of the gaslighting quite well. The second turn is kind of like it's him on Mars, it's him meeting the rebels, it's like kind of cementing this character, right? It's this kind of like, hey, yeah, it is what you think it is. It is what the movie's telling you it is. Then you've got the third turn, which is like, hey, actually, no, he is Hausen, and he is a bad guy, and he was sent undercover, and the only way they could get past the mutant psychic powers is for him to believe he was who he says he was. Then you got probably the most interesting scene in the film, which is they introduce a doctor, and the doctor's like, hey, man, I'm from Recall. I've been inserted into your memory because you're stuck. And you have to come with me. We can't leave you stuck in this. And there's this moment of kind of tense existential dread where you see Quayle go, oh, I am in a dream. This is not real. Like, he fully convinces him, and then you see the sweat trickle. And why would he be nervous if it's all a dream? And you kind of get that kill, and it's not a dream. And then lastly, and this is something that's been used in a few films that tackle this idea, at the end of the film, it fades to white. And traditionally, films fade to black. And it's that whole idea of fade to black, end of the story, fade to white, kind of questions whether it's the end of the story or whether it was even real to begin with. And you got these kind of turns that cover up the movie that came before it. And I think it's quite clever in its strategy of like, hey, we know what we've written is bonkers. We only want you to think about the last turn, though.
Yeah, and it's tricky because as well, like when you look at movies constructed this way, you will start to think about perspective, and perspective within the narrative, and they break all of the rules of perspective if the deal, if you like, is supposed to be that he is still back at recall at the end of the film. So, so for instance, they're constantly cutting away from Hauser, or Quaid, as the main character, and they're showing us scenes that he could have no idea of what is being said or what is happening. So perspective wise, the audience is separated often from Hauser or Quaid, which would indicate that it's real, you know, because that's what you do if you're not trying to, you know, commit to your protagonist, you know, which if it was all within the world of the dream, you would do. You would be locked with him, much like, you know, Harry and Harry
You can
Potter.
only see things he sees.
Yeah, you're never away from Harry Potter in the Harry Potter films, you know, but then they do other things which would actually indicate the opposite. So, for instance, when he first goes to recall and, you know, they ask him to describe a woman as part of the sequence, you know, he describes Melina, and then they show you, you know, an image of Melina, who is a character who then appears later in the film, which would lead you to think, well, yeah, the whole thing's at recall because the person that he described, you know, it then shows up exactly as seen at recall. So they do play it both ways, which is cheating, you know, and doesn't actually lock down whether or not, you know, it is all in his head or if it's, you know, something that you know, is happening for real. So I mean, ultimately it doesn't matter in my opinion in this film, but it is that odd kind of self-acknowledgement. Yeah, our story's bonkers, guys, like, you know.
So there is a cheating answer to whether it's real or not, but I'd like to hear, do you, in your head canon, is it a dream or is it real?
Well, because I'm a film stickler, the perspective issue annoys me enough that I choose to believe that it must be real, because, you know, otherwise there is no possible way to know what's happening outside of Quaid's perspective. So, but that's a very like that's a film analysis answer, like which the filmmakers may or may not have intended.
So because I do see this from a different perspective, and I don't look at the film analysis angle, I look at the facts that are in it. And before I read what I read, I would have chosen dream. Basically, because of that scene you described. He describes a woman, they insert the blue sky scenario, which is what happens at the end of the film, the blue skies of Mars. All these little details come into play that tell us that, at least within the knowledge of the film, it is a dream, or at least an implanted memory. Now, the actual answer to this is it all happened. Kind of. So the planned sequels to this film actually include what became Minority Report. So Minority Report was originally a film kind of set in this post Total Recall world on Mars, where they use the mutants as precogs. And, you know, they're solving crimes and things like that. And Quayle comes back as his character continuation from that movie, which only can suggest that it is real. But that never happened, and that was only an idea. So the real answer is it's kind of whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
It's one of those annoying kind of movies, like whatever you find more enjoyable, that's the answer. Because that's the sort of movie it is. There is not a sequel. There is a, would you call it a remake?
It's a remake. Like, you know, it's one of those remakes where they're like, we based it on the story. I'm like, but you used character names from the movie version, so I don't think you did.
Do you know why they changed his name in the movies from the book?
Is it just because Quayle is a weird name and Quaid is more masculine?
Around the same time, there was a presidential candidate called Dan Quayle. And they wanted to avoid any kind of thing, so they went from Quayle to Quaid.
There you go.
So, facts. Another fact in this movie. So, it took nearly 16 years to develop. And it was one of those kind of classic stories of, it was originally purchased by one studio. That studio went through all these things. That studio collapsed. It was originally going to be filmed in Australia. They had sets built, and then the film went under, so they had to destroy all the sets. And then you had a version of it.
It's a Fountain situation. Exactly the same thing happened in The Fountain.
Okay, just quietly, we don't mention that movie.
I mention it. I like The Fountain.
Just for anyone who's listening to this on audio, I took a breath. I didn't want to get into it. We're going to move on.
You mentioned sets built in Australia and then scratched when the movie went under. That's exactly what happened in Darren Aronofsky's The Fountain the first time. So I felt there was an opening there to bring up The Fountain organically. Now, for anyone listening, Ben hates The Fountain, and I love it. So
It's one of two movies I hate. Like literally, I hate them. I've
okay,
rewatched
well, look,
it. Anyway,
I can feel the intensity, radiating off you. So let's move on from The Fountain.
There was a version of this that had Patrick Swayze. Originally, they wouldn't put Arnold Schwarzenegger in the film because the original purchasers of the film and producers didn't see him as Quaid. Because the original in the story is quite a nerdy guy. He's like an office guy. And Schwarzenegger loved it so much, when they did go under, he convinced a couple of friends that ran like an independent studio to buy the film. And then he was never credited as a producer, but he was a producer on this film. He was heavily involved with the ending. He was heavily involved with, the cast and the crew and all that sort of stuff. So I said most of the crew suffered like dust inhalation. They also had very bad food poisoning, except for Arnold Schwarzenegger and one of the producers, because they flew in all their own food, because Schwarzenegger had a really bad time on the set of Predator with the exact same situation. Now, in this movie, I was watching it, and one thing really annoyed me throughout the whole thing, because I couldn't understand why they were doing it. He kept wearing a jacket. Why do you put Arnold Schwarzenegger in a dumpy jacket? It doesn't make sense. Turns out there's a reason for it. Right at the start of the film, there's this bit where he punches through the glass of the subway. That was meant to pre-detonate, and his hand was meant to go through. It did not pre-detonate, so he crashed it with his own fist, breaking multiple fingers and cutting his wrist. So they used a jacket to cover the mini cast that was on his hand for most of the film. You'll notice there's a bunch of shots when he's holding a gun and his other hand is kind of down by his side out of frame. It's because he had that mini cast on for most of the film. And the reason he had it on for most of the film is the next fact. This film was shot in sequence.
I did not know that.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, it is super duper weird, because it is, in most cases, insanely impractical.
So why did they do that? Why did they shoot it chronologically?
I couldn't find a reason why it was shot chronologically. I think it was mainly due to location. If you think about it, the outdoors part of this film is right at the end, right? So when they're filming on all the sets and stuff like that, if most of the cast is always going to be involved, there's not a real reason to shoot it out of sequence. Because you think about it, right? The people who are always in this film are Schwarzenegger and Ironsides, right?
But usually, and it depends how much studio space they had to work with. Obviously, if they're shooting in Mexico, maybe they weren't even on a real soundstage, perhaps. But I'm speculating there. But because usually what happens, even on a massive movie, is if it's a built movie where you're doing sets all the time. Like, for instance, Last Jedi is a good example of that. Like, they had a gigantic amount of sets, and they built so many of them practically. But you're constantly to save and economize on studio space, you're usually scratching one set and rebuilding it with something else. And then you're sort of moving your crew around the set. And what you're deciding as to what you shoot when is usually simply about logistics as to the size of the set that needs to be scratched versus the size of the set that's going to go back into its place, which again wouldn't lead you to filming chronologically unless they had the luxury of literally having so much space that they could build everything and they weren't having to scratch sets and build things in their place to then go film in. But I don't know. It's just super unusual.
That, and I think when I was talking about that, when you were talking about that, it made me think, I came across something else. Paul Verhoeven hates second unit directors.
Yeah, that'll help.
So there was second unit on this film, but on RoboCop, he fired 4 of them. Because he didn't like their work, he had no control over it and things like that. There was a guy called Armstrong who did second unit directing on this film, and he did, like, for example, the construction scene at the start was second unit and all that sort of stuff. So there was I think because of, if it's always going to be one guy, there's no reason to split up scenes and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, no, I found it really weird too. I'm like, oh, they shot it in sequence. Usually it's an artistic choice. Like you hear someone goes, I shot it in sequence because it fit the aesthetic of the film. And you're like, okay,
Yeah,
but
but it's almost always more costly. One of the most interesting tangent here, but one of the most interesting reasons to shoot in sequence that I've ever heard of was 2005's, or might be 2006, but it's right around there. 2000, I think it's 2005's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which they shot in sequence because it's a movie about kids, and the kids are growing over the 6 to 8 months that they're shooting the film, and they're like, we wanted the kids to grow chronologically with the movie, so that at the very least you weren't going scene to scene where they were different heights,
yep,
like we
that makes a lot of sense.
but again, like, very costly decision, because the whole idea to shoot not in sequence, non-sequentially, is always driven by cost and logistics factors. So interesting. I like that fact, Ben. I like it.
So a thing I felt jarring in this film was the reveal of the cab driver, the betrayal.
Yeah, it's kind of fun though, and
Well, it
it's sort
fits
of,
dream logic if they're going to go with that route, but yeah.
yes. It's but the thing is, I think that actor whose name escapes me, but
Mel Johnson Jr.
right, he was so, like, just charismatic and off the wall that, like, I just enjoyed seeing more of him on the screen. So when at first he's charismatic and helpful guy, and then he turns into charismatic evil guy, I was like, you know what, I'm here for more of your performance, bro, because, like, you are doing a great job here.
So, like, they were playing on a trope. So in this era of film, there was a lot of the wisecracking black sidekick. And when Mel Johnson Jr. first got the script, he read the description of his character as like a jive talking sidekick and threw it across the room. He's like, he'd just come from like blaxploitation cinema and didn't want anything to do with that sort of idea of a character. He then read the script and was like, oh, okay, like he gets to do some stuff. This is quite cool. But yeah, I think I found it jarring in the film, and the reason giving was it was a deliberate choice to go against a trope of a fun-loving sidekick. Like, give them at least a little bit more depth. Like, you get the reveal that he's a mutant, and then you get the reveal that it's a betrayal and that it's a mutant betraying other mutants, and they're like, why? And he's like, he's just greedy. Like, it's not like he's got all this thing. He's got 7 kids, 5 kids, 4 kids, 2 kids, 8 kids. Like, yeah. But yeah, no, I found it jarring, and the only way I could kind of reconcile it was that's how dreams go. People suddenly turn on a dime. Like, oh my gosh, my mom's a velociraptor. Where'd that come from? It was that kind of logic to me.
Yeah, and there is a fair bit of dream logic in the movie, anyway, which is also, but again, I'm sticking with my perspective thing,
I was trying to sneakily convince you. In general, this is one of the most enjoyable watches I've had so far in this podcast. It's not the best movie, but the insanity of it is real weird, like in a really fun way.
It's also like, it's kind of what Paul Verhoeven gave us, not just with this film, but really with all his films sort of from that 80s and even 90s era, is he gave us a really unique voice, and it's the kind of voice that's so unique, that it's very risky these days to give that kind of voice a platform now, because not everything works in the movie. A huge amount of money was spent, and it kind of just commits, and it commits to this one filmmaker's, very unique voice. You look at it and you go, that's a Paul Verhoeven film. Like, whatever that means,
Yeah.
I understand, and, you could get into the more pretentious side of things and say, oh, he's an auteur. It's auteur theory all over again. But like, that's, neither really here nor there. I guess I just sort of am thrilled that, a very commercial work like this got that crazy unique voice. And it's kind of, it was happening a lot at that time, you know, which is where you get like Tim Burton's Batman, which was
Ugh.
89, only a year before this. And it's sort of like, yeah, it's Batman, but it's Tim Burton's Batman. It's a totally unique to Tim Burton take on the character, for better or for worse, you know. And Paul Verhoeven stuff is the
Hashtag
same.
Burton's overrated.
So, well, you know,
So I think what his gift is a lot of times you get clashes of personalities who watch movies, right? You get the, I just want an action movie I don't have to think about. You get, I want a movie with a bit of substance. I want a movie that's a bit weird. He develops movies where three different people watch it, they get the thing they want out of it, and they don't notice the other two things. Like you look at RoboCop, you look at this, and you look at Starship Troopers, right? All three of these movies can be watched as action movies. And that's it. You get everything you want out of it via that. Then you can go, oh, the person who wants to look a little bit deeper sees the corporate greed, the fascism, the larger kind of concepts that are sown throughout these movies. And you're like, oh, I actually like those movies because they're telling us something about the world. And then you get the kind of like those people who want to watch kind of like a weird kind of odd movie that is a little bit janky if you look at it, and plays with odd themes and dives into the darker parts of what human beings think about. And you get this kind of like this weird kind of like, I like the dark, I like the uncomfortableness of this movie, I like the darkness of what this movie is trying to tell me. And I said all three of these movies can watch it, and then the other person can describe it to them. They're like, what movie did you just watch?
yeah,
And I think that's
yeah.
what he nails. I think that's what, in this period of his movie making career, that's what he was just crushing out of the park.
I find it hard pressed not to agree with you, you know, like, because that was sort of, he had something going on, you know, that was just unique and worked and somehow reached a mass audience, you know. And in some ways it's sort of like, this is a director who probably, you know, should not have reached a mass audience, you know, but through weird quirk of fate he did, you know. And then he did it again and did it again and did it again, you know. And
I think
we
it was
got
a
this,
lot of, yeah,
you just got
creating,
this string of weird, you know, but still somehow commercial movies that are just really interesting.
it very much is like, hey, these projects exist. Paul Verhoeven comes into it. The project stays what it is, but his flavor comes in. And
Yeah,
it's the flavor that people can dig in and find.
yeah, for sure.
As I said, really, really dug this movie. And I'm actually in this weird position with this podcast where I'm like, I don't want to go ahead and watch other movies. Like, I immediately wanted to watch Starship Troopers after this. I immediately wanted to go back and watch RoboCop after this. But I'm like, no, these are possibilities for other things.
Yeah,
And it's this kind of weird, like, because before this podcast started up, Jim, I wasn't watching movies. I was watching TV. I was watching long form serialized content. That's the pattern I'd fallen into. And I've come back to this wonderful world of, I get to watch these movies and actually enjoy something that's crafted for 2 hours, 1.5
yeah.
hours, 4 hours. And that's all the time it gets. So it has this different art form to it. And I'm starting to really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm having a blast. So, look, my final thoughts on Total Recall 1990. I really enjoyed revisiting this. It was much grosser than I remembered. And, you know, Paul Verhoeven is a unique voice. And for whatever reason, I'm happy he made this very bizarre Arnold Schwarzenegger film that we get to live with now forever. So,
Strange last minute fact. Sorry, you jogged my memory with the violence. Do you know why it was like kind of in your face violent? Arnold Schwarzenegger requested that the kills not be all gun kills because he'd done a bunch of movies previous where he just kept dispatching bad people with guns. So that's why you get a lot of holds and snaps and karate chops and physical impacts in this movie because he
yeah,
requested it.
that's some ugly stuff here, you know, like, so.
And part of that, Michael Ironsides broke 2 ribs and really damaged his arm partway through this movie
Yeah, it
because of
doesn't
the
surprise me.
physicality of it. But
Doesn't surprise me.
rad movie. Happy I watched it. Happy I picked it. I'm a legend. Jim, Are you a legend?
I think I am. Would you like to hear what we're going to watch next?
I really would.
Okay. Look, I had such a great time watching Total Recall that next week we're going to watch Total Recall
Oh.
2012 edition.
Wow. You know what? I always knew this was a possibility. And there were a couple of times where I almost did something very similar, but I thought, no, I could be more creative than this.
I actually, when you pitched originally, you're like total. I think you said remake or original. You know, like for Total Recall, and I was like original. And then when you said Total Recall, just weirdly, I was like, I kind of wanted to watch the remake. And then I was like, you know what? If you can dream it, like you know,
you know what? It follows the theme of this film.
It does.
If you can dream it, you can do it.
And I thought it would just be really fun because we haven't really done this before where we watched the original. Now, straight away, we're going to watch the remake. And of course, the inevitable comparisons between the two we'll be able to talk about on the next cast, you know, as we dive into the 2012 version of Total Recall.
And spoilers, I haven't seen it.
What?
No, never watched it.
Okay. Should we watch? I have seen it.
If you bring up some sort of director's cut, I'm going to lose my mind.
Well, now I don't know what to do because that's exactly what I was going to do. Like, we could watch original or director's cut. You know,
does it add 7 hours to the viewing time?
It adds about 9 minutes to the viewing time. But
we can do the director's cut.
Okay, it may be hard to locate the director's cut. So
here's the deal. Let's watch the original.
Okay.
And if I can find the extra scenes, I'll watch them.
All right, that sounds good. Okay, so we'll watch the we'll watch the original remake of Total Recall instead of the director's cut of the remake of Total Recall. How about that?
Sounds good. Before we head out today, I just want to mention that you can actually interact with us in a few different ways. If you're listening to this podcast on iTunes or Spotify, please rate or leave a review. We would love to hear from you. We would love to know what we're doing right. We'd love to know what we're doing wrong. We'd love to know what we could do that would help you keep listening. The second place and most important place we'd love you to come check us out. Wow, is YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. We post all these. You'll see our beautiful faces. You'll see, us talking about movies. We'd love for you to kind of check out our YouTube channel. Again, thumbs up, leave a comment. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us what movies you'd like us to watch. And last but not least, we are on Instagram. There will be a Facebook soon to follow, but if you search any of those locations for Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures, you will find us and you will be able to interact with us. And look, we'd love it.
Sounds good. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Like,
Next
share,
week,
subscribe.
Deja Vu, Total Recall.
Bye.